You may be familiar with the name Stan Kenton, who's a band leader back in the 40s, 50s, and 60s. This is the story of the composer-arranger who almost killed Kenton's career. His name is Robert Graettinger. Post-swing era band leader Stan Kenton reached the apex of his career, expanding the genre of orchestral jazz. His electrifying, bop-influenced recordings extended the form's horizon, yet managed to please a wide audience. Kenton was one of the primary exponents of bridging the gulf between the dance hall and the concert hall. He assured listeners that if they didn't feel like jitterbugging, it was okay to sit back and enjoy his dazzling arrangements. Well, by late 1948, exhausted by touring and the pressures of a staggeringly large payroll, Kenton quit music and took a vacation. 6 months later, he launched his legendary Innovations Orchestra. Dancing wasn't just discouraged, it was impossible. Kenton said to Downbeat's Nat Hentoff, "I don't think jazz was meant to continue as dance music. What jazz is going to evolve into is an American style of classical music. And that's what we're trying to do." Kenton wasn't alone. During the 40s and 50s, Jimmy Giuffre, George Russell, Dave Brubeck, John Lewis, among others, explored the frontiers of what became known as third stream music. For his Innovations band, Kenton gathered such adventurous souls as Shorty Rogers, Bud Shank, Art Pepper, Shelley Mann, and a young trumpeter, a high-note maniac named Maynard Ferguson. Kenton's 40-piece outfit attempted to revolutionize the bandstand by fusing serious music and jazz. Music critic George Simon referred to it as, quote, "from Bartok to bongos," and he said that with a sneer. Now, this had been predated by the symphonic jazz movement of the 20s and 30s. Gershwin, Whiteman, Buffet, Ellington, but those band leaders had succeeded in growing their audiences. Kenton mostly repelled his with his radical approach. In the band leader's own words, he said, "If you start looking for a melody, you won't find any." Kenton's musicians and some jazz critics appreciated his pioneering moves, but as Carol Easton wrote in her Kenton bio, entitled Straight Ahead, quote, "The critics were trained and paid to make the effort to meet the music halfway. The audience was not. Legions of Stan's most devoted fans were turned off by the complicated, unconventional harmonies and what they considered a lack of emotion in much of the music." And in Carol Easton's words, quote, "For many loyal fans, the last straw was the music of Robert Graettinger." Robert Frederick Grainger was a loner. This gaunt 6'4" specter lived in squalid apartments in seedy Los Angeles neighborhoods with little more than a floor mattress, an upright piano, and a stove. He was convinced he could outwit death with a steady diet of scrambled eggs, milk, and vitamins. He was an impotent alcoholic in a shabby wardrobe with concave cheekbones and a bad complexion. He rarely went to bed. He was fond of saying, "Sleep in the grave." This haunted, cadaverous figure was born, fittingly, on Halloween in 1923. Growing up in Ontario, California, Graettinger's childhood was reportedly fairly normal. In school, he played football and he developed an interest in music. He studied saxophone and spent summers gigging at mountain resorts, where he acquired a secondary interest: drinking. Heavily. He began arranging in the swing idiom like his early idols Duke Ellington and Jimmy Lunsford. In the early 1940s, he played alto sax in swing bands under Alvino Ray and Benny Carter. In 1941, backstage at the Hollywood Palladium, he introduced himself to Stan Kenton and handed him an original arrangement. It was ambitious, but amateurish. Kenton was impressed, though, and encouraged him to keep working and come back later with more advanced ideas. 6 years later, 1947, Graettinger reappeared with a fully arranged composition entitled Thermopylae, which Kenton recorded almost immediately. It was a combative piece of music in just under 3 minutes. Thermopylae unfolds menacingly, pitting the brass against the rest of the orchestra. A dissonant fanfare bellows insistently, nearly drowning out the reeds and rhythm. It was a ponderous work. In a 1974 dissertation, The Music and Life of Robert Graettinger, Robert Morgan noted that the piece employed, quote, the almost constant use of rootless chords, resulting in an unbroken tension, so that the whole concept of tension and release seems to be negated. The resulting atmosphere is depressive. Metronome magazine called it, quote, confused writing. The thing gets nowhere. And Downbeat shivered that Thermopylae was, quote, a moribund, impressionistic thing concerned only with mood, and a depressing one at that. Even Stan Kenton had his doubts, admitting to friends, I don't know whether Bob's music is genius or a bunch of crap. The 24-year-old Grainger was, by this time, no longer a professional musician. He'd given away his alto sax, telling a friend, I have more to say than I can say with one horn. In all Grainger's years on Kenton's payroll, the band leader never once saw Grainger play an instrument. Kenton next began rehearsing an early version of Grainger's magnum opus, The City of Glass. There is a CD, City of Glass. Just to refresh my memory, I listened to it on the drive in. It is fucking scary. And it's just, it is relentless, it's combative, it's irritating, it's annoying. And it's not free jazz. It's structured, it's composed, it's arranged, it's meticulous. It's brutal. Kenton next began rehearsing an early version of Grainger's magnum opus, The City of Glass Suite, a tone poem laced with jaggedness and atonality. The work would be revised over the next 5 years before a definitive recording was made in 1951. Grainger's compositions and arrangements are characterized by unrelenting dissonance, polytonality, and colliding rhythms. The instruments seem to fight each other, as if there's an insurrection among the horns. To the uninitiated, the band sometimes sounds like it's tuning up, when they're actually 1/3 along into the piece. His music evokes modern composers such as Edgar Varese and Schoenberg, rather than the bebop titans and hard bop mavericks of his day. The arrangements are bleak, lonely, and removed, wallowing in cacophony and pain. To many of his works, Graettinger assigned throwaway titles. Read the titles: a cello, a thought, an orchestra, a trumpet. Some considered his works equally disposable. Barry Ulanov, a critic, in Metronome remarked on City of Glass, as music, it seems to me to fall somewhere between Schoenberg and Schillinger, but most of all, it seems to fall, nowhere suggesting an understanding of atonal or 12-tone composing traditions. Not all reviews were negative. Gramophone called City of Glass, quote, an impressive piece which deserves to be taken seriously. Rob Darnell in Downbeat, after hurling pejoratives like shrill, intolerably harsh, and stunts beaten to exhaustion, conceded, he's got something here that's brashly alive and at its best, tremendously exciting. Kenton seemed unconcerned about his audience, who had come to expect maverick moves from the man for whom the term progressive jazz had been coined. House of Strings, another early Graettinger work, Kenton found thrilling. He told an interviewer, from then on, everything that Graettinger wrote, I didn't contest, because I felt he had arrived and knew what he was doing. Barry McRae, in the Jazz Handbook, dismisses Graettinger with one word: pretentious. George Simon, in Metronome, wrote that Graettinger's arrangement of the romantic ballad, You Go to My Head, was, quote, an intense-sounding bit of impressionistic neuroticism that bothers me. The sullen Graettinger traveled with the Kenton band, but he rarely talked with the musicians. He was usually along for the ride, at Kenton's insistence. The band leader was concerned about his reclusive protege's indifference to his health. Observing the band in rehearsal and performance, Graettinger studied each player's technique to compose specifically for each man's style. The work called A Trumpet. It's a showpiece for Maynard Ferguson. Saxist Willie Maiden said that Graettinger didn't just observe Ferguson on stage, he studied the trumpeter's backstage warm-up patterns. Quote, what he played when he was just fooling around in every dressing room in the country. Maiden said an upper register solo scored by Graettinger for Ferguson was, quote, an exercise that Maynard used to warm up to get his chops together. Individual parts often had little or no relation to what other members of the orchestra were playing. Saxophonist Art Pepper said, quote, you were independent of the guy next to you. If you got lost, you were dead because there was no way to figure out where you were. Trombonist Bill Russo admitted, a lot of those chords hurt your teeth, especially your fillings. Graettinger's life was as desolate as his music. Band copyist Clinton Romer said Graettinger embodied, quote, the novel or motion picture version of the starving composer living in the garret. Composer-arranger Pete Rugelow's wife, Jan, said about Graettinger, he was a very weird person. He had this terrible coloring. He looked sick. Vocalist-arranger Gene Howard found him, quote, frightening. Art Pepper said, he looked sort of like a ghoul or a vampire. He had these strange, haunted eyes. No one was closer to Kenton's inner circle than Pete Rugelow, who was considered to be Stan Kenton's musical alter ego. Even to Rugelow, Graettinger was a looming question mark. Rugelow said, I never really got a chance to talk to Graettinger. He didn't show up much. He didn't socialize. He was a strange-looking fellow, tall, thin, no color, probably never in the sun. I guess he slept all day. A couple of times I was with the orchestra when he came by. He would talk to Stan. Stan would play whatever he brought, and Bob would go back to his little apartment. Rugelow admired Graettinger's work. He said, I was trying to write modern music, things that were classical sounding, influenced by Stravinsky or Bartók. The band didn't know what to think. A trumpet player would say to me, hey, I'm playing B flat and he's got a B natural. What's the note? And I'd say, no, that's right, that's what I want. But Graettinger went further than I did. A lot of the players weren't pleased. They'd rather play the swinging Count Basie type stuff. It was challenging, and while some of them liked it, most of them probably didn't, but encouraged me to go farther than I would have in my composing. Graettinger's scoring technique was equally unconventional. It involved hand coloring sections of graph paper. The horizontal axis represented time, the vertical designated pitch, and colors indicated instruments. For example, blue for saxophones, red for the trumpets, amber for trombones. He learned this system from his mentor, Russ Garcia, who called it, quote, painting a score. Graettinger also had a habit of using both sides of the graph paper for unrelated compositions, with no regard for continuity. For 2 years, Graettinger lived with an amateur pianist named Gail Madden, a groupie type who saw herself as inspiring whatever, quote, genius she happened to be shacking with. As described by Easton in the Kenton bio, Madden, quote, looked even freakier than Graettinger in mismatched shoes and men's clothing. She was volatile and erratic, if not downright psychotic. Graettinger came home one day to find everything dyed pink. Bedspread, towels, curtains, clothing, shoes, everything. Easton said one musician tagged Madden, quote, a sexual circus, whereas Graettinger was impotent. She eventually left him for Jerry Mulligan and others. Kenton's sponsorship helped Graettinger achieve a degree of exposure he would never have enjoyed with an orchestra of lesser renown. Kenton was the only conductor willing to take a chance with Graettinger, and there's no indication that this human shadow ever sought to arrange or compose for another band. Art Pepper recalled the debut of City of Glass at the Chicago Civic Opera House. This is Art Pepper talking. It was a revolutionary composition, an incredibly hard musical exercise. It was a miracle that we got through it. Bob conducted, tall, thin guy. He looked like a living skeleton, like a dead man with sunken eyes, a zombie. He took us through it, and he finished, and he turned around to the audience, and he nodded, and the audience didn't do nothing. The place was packed. We played the shit out of this thing, and now there wasn't a sound. They didn't know what to do. We didn't know what to do. I'm looking at Stan off to the side and thinking, well, what's going to happen now? Stan looked at the audience, got an idea, and all of a sudden he leaps out onto the stage, gestured at the band to rise, swung his body around to the audience, and they started clapping wildly. And then they stood up with an ovation that lasted 5 minutes. Compared to Kenton's previous releases, sales of City of Glass, the album, were dismal. Strangely, the LP liner notes contained a comment that were at odds with Art Pepper's recollection. After the Chicago performance, the notes conceded, the applause was sparse, and the criticism that followed was severe. The notes further reflected that both Graettinger and Kenton were, quote, sorely disappointed. This Modern World was Graettinger's sequel. It was never performed in concert, and it was recorded sporadically over a year and a half. With the possible exception of the work entitled A Cello, the various pieces exhibit no more warmth than Graettinger's previous works. Historian John Litweiler remarked that this modern world is, quote, a cold world, cruel in the distant pure beauty of its saxophones, the weight of its low brass, and the nerve-wracking high extremes of its trumpet passages. The threat conveyed by Graettinger's beauty is no less dangerous for its distance and indifference because it is a threat to our very sanity. Matt Hentoff in Downbeat was unimpressed. He labeled Graettinger a melodramatic Wagnerian. Graettinger left Kenton in 1952 when the Innovations Orchestra was disbanded. His solitary ways persisted and deepened. Kenton would occasionally take the wasted scarecrow for a meal. Kenton recalled, Bob would get juiced and he'd say, what time is it? And I'd say, it's 3 a.m. And he'd say, you have time to go down and look at the ocean? We'd drive down to Santa Monica and he'd sit there and look at the ocean, and then I'd take him home. Graettinger's music has infiltrated the culture, however indirectly. His chaotic tints have colored the scores of subsequent composers and arrangers, and if his groundbreaking works now sound slightly less daunting, it's because 50 years of musical iconoclasm have prepped modern ears for his dysmorphic surrealism. Gunther Schuller declared Graettinger, quote, a complete original. Petjan Blom, leader of the Bohunks Orchestra, observed, Graettinger's music is something of a sound barrier. You have to break through at high velocity. Once you've done that, you're in a new sonic landscape governed by strange laws and aesthetics. It requires some adjusting for old-fashioned ears. It's rewarding. Graettinger once told a friend, I live above the timberline where nothing grows. Graettinger died of lung cancer on March 12, 1957. He was 34. The only musicians who attended his funeral were Stan Kenton and Pete Rugolo. Downbeat magazine and Metronome, neither of them ran obits. City of Glass was released in 1951 on Capitol Records, who reluctantly agreed to record the suite after producer Lee Gillette lobbied strenuously for the project. Gillette hadn't even heard the work. He'd made a case based on Kenton's assurances and the producer's faith in Kenton's progressive instincts. Gillette later revealed, this is his quote, the night that we completed City of Glass, I took home a copy of the tape. I had a studio on the property away from the house. I went out there in the dark about 1 o'clock in the morning and played the whole City of Glass album. When I got through and opened the door, I was afraid to walk to the house. This CD is in print. It has most of the Graettinger compositions and arrangements that were done for Kenton. The early stuff, it sounds weird, but it's somewhat digestible. You get the City of Glass, it's like, it's brutal. It's the only word I can think. And there's other things on here too from this Modern World suite. Recommended if you are of an adventurous bent. And this book is still in print, I'm told, because they keep sending me royalty checks.